We're taking some of your calls. Let's go to the Outkick VIP line. Who we got there, Danny G?
Fred in Florida.
What you got for me?
Hey, good morning, guys. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks for being a VIP, by the way. We've got sign-ups like crazy. If you go to Outkick.com, you can get a VIP line and everything else.
I love the message board because I messaged something about I started a chain about Jermel Hill and the changes she's made in her career, and God, the response on that was incredible.
Yeah, a lot of people are having fun hanging out. Smart conversation on the message board as part of your Outkick VIP. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah, so we were talking about it feels like to me from watching the sports media, more on social media than on TV, but it's like they don't want to see sports happen, and I don't get that because I imagine a lot of the people that make content make income off of sports. So why would you want to bash something when that gives you income just for a few more clicks? I mean, is the click really worth it in the long run when people are going to realize, well, you didn't want this to work, and now all of a sudden you're going to change your story when it works? So I just hope some of these guys stay consistent with it when after the end result is going to be success. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's counterintuitive, but people root against things that make sense for their careers sometimes. And I think that's when you're making an emotional decision as opposed to a logical decision. I think many sports media members have bought in and become overcome by fear, and they have further fed that fear by their emotional responses. And what's interesting is a lot of times now, whenever they tweet out a negative story, all of the responses are like, what are you doing? I don't blame you guys. Like, do you want sports back or not? Are you going to be even-handed in sharing positive and negative news, or are you just going to share negative news? Who's up next?
All right, we got Josh in Illinois.
Josh, what you got for me?
How you doing? Good morning, Clay. Thank you guys for being honest every day and bringing the truth. We really need it in this time. I'd just like to say I don't know what's going on with this country. I've deleted social media. People need to learn how to analyze the data and know the facts before they jump to conclusions and read headlines. And as far as the sports media go, last time I turned on ESPN before last night's watch the Boston Red Sox was probably March 13th. And I just don't understand in media across the board why it's everything fear and want to scare people. It just really, really unnerving as a country. And I appreciate you bringing the truth every day and letting people know that there are good things happening.
Thank you. I think there's a good point by our VIP caller as well. I think television has been less pronounced about buying into the fear porn people on television. It's probably because they've just talked about the coronavirus less. But I think social media is where it's spread like wildfire. And I mean sports on television. Certainly MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, whoever you watch, they have been obsessed with the coronavirus and like terrified by it. But I'm talking about sports. I don't think it's been as pronounced. I think it's mostly come out of social media on sports. Who's up next?
All right, we got Steve in Florida.
Steve, what's shaking?
Hey, Clay. I appreciate the idea of emotions versus logic, and as far as career choices, I am a lifelong teacher and coach in Florida. And I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more that, yes, I would love to be back in school. I would love to greet a new group of students. I would love to work with them again in a couple of weeks. And logically, I don't know that makes sense, though. I hear you every morning say kids should be back in school, and your reasoning is because they are less susceptible. And I agree with that, and I would love to go back. But what about the teachers? What about the administrators?
So, thanks. What do you coach?
I coach basketball.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for the call. We're about to go to the break here. So far in the world, there is not one case in the entire world where many kids have continued to go to school even with coronavirus. Not one case in the entire world of a student giving the virus to a teacher and having that teacher die. Not one. And remember, they aren't shutting down daycares. Daycare teachers have been taking care of kids all over this country, and I haven't heard of one daycare teacher dying working because they got sick from a kid in the entire country. This is Outkick on Fox Sports Radio. We got a bunch of people who want to weigh in. Dub, pop them up in order you think makes sense.
We got Tommy in Florida.
Tommy, what you got for me?
Man, once again, great show. Here, I was thinking about your interview with Peter King, and something just hit me. I said, and he makes his living off the NFL. If you asked Peter King, you have your choice, Peter. You can either have college and pro football this year, or Donald Trump doesn't win the election. Which one do you think he would choose? You already know the answer.
Yeah, 100%. It's a good question. It's Donald Trump loses. And I think that factors in with the sports media as well, because I think they are so anti-Trump. The sports media is more liberal than the regular political media in general, that I think it infuses their worldview with negativity, right? And so I really do think that factors in. It's a great point. I think if you told Peter King, hey, you can choose who wins the election, but in doing so, there will be no college football and no NFL season, I think Peter King and I think a ton of sports media people would say, okay, then Donald Trump, I don't want him to be president. And that's crazy because it directly impacts. And what's sad is if the college football or the NFL season didn't happen, a ton of these dudes would lose their jobs. A ton of them. And I think the other factor here is they don't understand business. Most people and that's not taking a shot at sports media, that's most people in the country don't understand business. I say a lot on this program, think about it yourself as a business owner as opposed to as a employee. When you have to make payroll, when you have to employ a bunch of people and you have to run a business, your worldview is much larger. It just is, because you have to be concerned not only with your own paycheck, but with making sure that everybody else that is on your payroll is paid. And so there's a difference between thinking like an employee, which I think is what most sports media people do, and thinking like a business owner. I guarantee you all those guys' bosses are like, man, if sports doesn't come back, we're going to have to fire you guys. And then they're going to come on Twitter and they're going to be like, yeah, because of the coronavirus, I got laid off. And a lot of people are not going to have any sympathy at all because they're going to be like, well, yeah, you spent 6 months telling us that the coronavirus was so awful, nobody could go to work. Is it any surprise? And by the way, I also think that social media is way overloaded with people who make a living working from home. It's a lot easier if you can do your job from home for you to be like, everybody just needs to stay home. Yeah, that's like 40% of American employees can actually work from home. We just got that interesting question about the election results versus sports. A lot of people are having to make choices. Do I want to make enough money to buy food for my family, or do I want to shelter at home and try to avoid the coronavirus? The most economically susceptible out there are the ones that have to take the biggest risks in order to provide for their family. They don't have the luxury of saying, oh, I'll just pull out my laptop and work from home today, because 60% of people at least can't work from home. Fires me up. Who's up next?
We got Marcus in Birmingham.
Marcus, what you got for me?
Clay, you're doing a great job. I agree with you 100% about people dying with the coronavirus, not of it. But I also think that the Black Lives Matter have been hijacked. I think you got core group and you got a group that's being paid by people like George Soros and people like that.
Yeah.
I think the same thing about these sportscasters. Why would you talk against your economic interest other than you getting economic satisfaction somewhere else? That's just my
Marcus,
opinion.
if I'm sorry to cut you up, but if I remember correctly, we talked a while back on the show, you own your own business, right?
No, that's not me. That's not me.
Different caller. All right, so
Yeah.
but you think that the economic self-interest here is being hijacked by the sports media, same thing that's happening to other people in this country.
Yeah, I think it's election year. You got big high-paid people like George Soros, people like that who say, hey, let's pay them. We got to win this election. How are you going to talk against your own economic interest if you're legit, if you're an NFL broadcaster and talking against it? Like everything else, this Black Lives Matter. You got a bunch of white liberals there. That's the core group that is destroying everything. I mean, it makes no sense. They'll do anything they can to get Donald Trump unelected. And here it is. I mean, you got Bill Maher. Bill Maher, whatever his name, he said it about a year or two ago. He said, I don't care what happens to the poor people. We need an economic collapse. But he's right.
Yeah.
He's not affected at all. But, hey, we're struggling. It makes no sense.
Thank you for the call. I mean, yeah, look, it fires me up because if you are arguing just stay home and work, it's like, okay, are you not noticing that 2/3 of the country can't do that? And I've been beating this drum for months. If you listen to this show, you know, like I'm far more concerned about 40 million people being out of work than I am about 4 million people getting a virus with a 99.6 or 7% survival rate at least. I just am. And that doesn't mean that I don't want your grandma to live forever. I wish everybody lived forever, trust me. But that's not an economic reality. We are all going to die at some point. And the death rate, I believe, from 40 million people losing their jobs is going to be more substantial than the death rate from the coronavirus. I really do. I think it impacts far more people's lives in a negative way. And it just frustrates me that so few people recognize economic reality in this situation. And I think sports is important to come back because it sends the message that the country needs to and should get back to work, as well as kids being back in school. Who's up next, Dub?
We got Derek in Iowa.
Derek, what you got for me?
Hey, what's up, Clay? Not to bring up political stuff, but I think if it was a different year, you might see different outcomes from the sports media. It just seems like they're a puppet to the national media, especially this year. And if you think about the left in politics, they've lost so many battles in courts lately, and it was just because of their actual hate of the president and things like that, and their emotions took over. And the facts were all in front of them, but their emotions were so strong that they were blinded. And you can see that with the sports media. They're so intertwined with the regular media that we see today that they don't want to lose either. And they're so blinded of their own emotions that the facts are right in front of them, and they just don't see it.
Yeah, thanks. I do think it's a willful blindness. I really do. And I mean, you know, the analogy is used a lot of the glass half full, the glass half empty. The way you look at things, to me, if you're going to be biased, you should be biased in favor of your job being able to continue to exist. And it seems to me in the sports media, the opposite is true. And it isn't rational, which is why I think it's an emotional-based response. Because I think if you sit down and you talk through with these people, you're like, hey, when you only share negative news about the coronavirus, when the Miami Marlins test positive and you write about the NFL, but your first thought is, oh my God, the NFL is not going to be able to play this year. That's not a rational response. And the same thing is true in college football and other sports that have not yet come back. Now, they're losing all these battles because business is ultimately winning out, and because businessmen weigh risks. That's what you do when you run a business, is you literally have to put your money where your mouth is and weigh risks and everything else associated with decisions. And they are making the rational decision to come back because the risk factors are not substantial enough to justify staying closed and losing billions of dollars, which is what would happen otherwise. Who's up next?
We got Will in San Diego.
Will, what you got for me?
Hey, how you doing? There's a need right now for about 30,000 people to test out very good, very promising vaccines for C-19 out of Oxford, England, and New England here in the United States. If you got the NFL players and the D1 college players, think of the money that Jerry Jones and Mr. Kraft would make. Think of all the small-town big games down in the South. The whole college and the whole constituency of these places live for these games. And we all get well by Christmas and we forget the whole thing. So that's my
This
solution.
is actually a fantastic call. Your idea is, and so let me walk you back through it. 30,000 people in the United States, is my understanding. The Moderna vaccine has entered into its stage 3 testing, right?
Yes, sir.
That every pro athlete and college athlete could be a part of that test. Now, thanks for the call, by the way. It's a fascinating idea. The challenge, I would imagine, was, first of all, you'd have to get the players' unions to sign off on it, and the players wouldn't do it because too many of them are afraid. But you also have to balance it out, age appropriate, race appropriate, everything else. But in theory, it's actually a fascinating question. What if you gave the opportunity to all of these different pro athletes to be a part of the test trial for this virus? Athletes all talk about how they want to be more than an athlete, how they are so interested in making the world a better place. Wouldn't that be a lot more of a way to make a statement than putting somebody's name on your jersey or your helmet and making millions of dollars to do it? If you actually stepped up and said, hey, I'll be one of the volunteers to test this vaccine, which might be great because it puts you at the front of the line if the vaccine works, which all of the evidence supports that it would. And at a minimum, it would probably make the locker room safer because even if it doesn't work 100%, it probably makes you a little bit less likely to get it. It's a great call. I hadn't thought of that idea. It's a really fascinating idea. Dub, any other callers?
Yeah, we got one more. We got Luke in New Jersey.
It's going to be, by the way, it's rare that a caller calls in and has such an interesting idea that I would have otherwise never thought of. And I bet a lot of you are out there like, that's a pretty interesting call. Good job. Who was that in San Diego?
That would be Will in San Diego with the good
job
call.
by Will in San Diego there.
Then last one
and
here.
By the way, don't we have a Marcus in Birmingham who calls the show that is a small business owner?
I know he's from Birmingham. I can't recall his name, though.
Oh, I thought it was Marcus. I guess not. Maybe we got double Marcuses in Birmingham. Who's up? Final call here?
Luke in New Jersey.
Luke in New Jersey. What you got for me?
Hey, Clay, I just want to say awesome addition with Jason Whitlock coming onto the show. He just makes so much sense. And I believe that if Trump would have said no sports, then they would be saying sports all the way.
Thanks for the call. It is funny. Like I said, there is just such an immediate reaction in many parts of the country against anything that Donald Trump is in favor of that I do think it's interesting if, for instance, remember back in March, they told us all we shouldn't wear masks because they didn't help. Everybody, Dr. Fauci, Surgeon General, everybody in the White House, everybody on the White House task force. It was a straightforward and direct message. Do not wear a mask. It doesn't help. That was the consensus. The CDC, everybody was opposed to the wearing of masks. Okay. Now, everybody is saying, oh, you got to wear a mask everywhere you go. What if Trump had come out in favor of masks back in March, even though it wasn't supported at that time by the data or by the experts? Would left-wing people now refuse to wear masks because Trump had come out in favor of them and been proven right? I think they might, just because it's an anti-Trump opinion. I wish we could go back in time and test it. And Trump, back in March, had said, I know people are saying don't wear masks, but I 100% believe a mask makes a big difference, and so I'm going to start wearing a mask everywhere, and I encourage everyone in the country to wear masks. I think that liberals would have said, there's no way I'm listening to Donald Trump and wearing a mask, and I think they would be fighting the idea of masks right now. I really do. Because it's an emotional response. Trump is in favor of it. I'm against it. Doesn't matter what it is. And it's not logical in many ways. And I think that has infiltrated into sports and the way that people respond to the Miami Marlins.